The mahogany clock on the wall of the Alamo National Bank ticked with a solemn, indifferent rhythm, each second a leaden weight in the humid San Antonio air. Evangeline Harper stood at the teller window, and the worn leather of her satchel clutched in one hand, her mind a world away from the murmur of commerce. She was rehearsing the words she would use to close her account, a final severance from the city that had offered nothing but false starts and the sharp sting of betrayal. Her gaze drifted to the small silver locket she held in her other hand, its surface cool against her palm. Inside, behind the delicate clasp, was a miniature tintype, the only image she possessed of the parents she had never known. It was her anchor, the single tangible link to an identity that often felt as thin as smoke. The bank's heavy oak doors swung open with a sudden violent crash that shattered the afternoon calm. 3 men stormed in their faces, obscured by dusty bandanas, their hands filled with the cold, brutal geometry of Colt revolvers. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a stark, suffocating silence. The clock continued its placid ticking, a grotesque counterpoint to the frozen terror. "Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt," the largest of the men barked, his voice a gravelly command that brooked no argument. His 2 companions fanned out their pistols, sweeping across the patrons and staff, freezing them in place. But it was the 4th man, the leader, who drew Eva's attention. He entered last, moving not with the frantic energy of a common thief, but with the unhurried, predatory grace of a man in complete control. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark traveling suit that seemed immune to the Texas dust. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a clean-shaven face, sharp features, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of mercy. He was William Garrett, though Eva would not learn his name until much later. "Ladies and gentlemen," Garrett began, his voice cultured and calm, a chilling contrast to the violence of their entrance. "This is a simple business transaction. We are here to make a withdrawal. Your cooperation will ensure it is a swift and painless one." While his men efficiently emptied the teller drawers, Garrett turned his attention to the patrons. He moved down the line with a methodical purpose that was far more terrifying than random brutality. He was not just after money. He was taking personal effects, watches, rings, brooches, stripping people of their memories along with their valuables. When he reached Eva, his cold eyes flickered from her face to the silver locket still clutched in her hand. "That is a lovely piece," he said, his tone conversational. "May I see it?" Eva's hand tightened reflexively. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please, it's all I have of my parents." Garrett's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. It was a smile of pure, dismissive power. "Sentimentality is a luxury, miss. One I'm afraid you can no longer afford." He did not snatch it. His movements were deliberate, almost gentle, as he reached out and pried her fingers open. He took the locket, his touch impersonal and cold. He glanced at it for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before dropping it into a leather satchel his man held open. A raw, desperate sound escaped Eva's throat. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking, "take my money. It's all I have, but leave me that. It has no value to you." Garrett paused and looked at her. Truly looked at her, and in that moment she saw the chilling emptiness behind his educated facade. "You are mistaken," he said softly, his voice a silken threat. "Everything has value to me. Your despair, for instance. It is illuminating." He turned away without another word, leaving her hollowed out the space in her hand, feeling like a gaping wound. The robbers were gone as quickly as they had come, melting back into the city's dusty streets, leaving behind a trail of shattered glass, overturned furniture, and the quiet, ragged sound of a dozen people trying to remember how to breathe. Eva stood frozen, the teller's concerned questions washing over her unheard. The money in her satchel, the meager savings she had guarded so carefully, was untouched. But she had been robbed of something far more precious. The locket was gone. Her anchor was gone. And in its place was a terrifying bottomless void. That night, she did not sleep. The image of Garrett's cold eyes was seared into her mind. His indifference was a more profound violation than any physical violence. He had not just taken an object. He had taken her history, her connection to a life she could only imagine. San Antonio was no longer just a place of failed opportunities. It was a city haunted by the face of a man who saw human feeling as a commodity to be collected. She had to leave. She had to run not just from the city, but from the memory of that cold, calculating smile. 2 days later, in a dusty corner of a San Antonio newspaper, her eyes fell upon a small, unassuming advertisement. Cook wanted for ranch work. Experience with children preferred. Steady position for the right person. Apply in person at White Hawk Ranch, 10 miles west of Broken Ridge. Broken Ridge. The name sounded like the end of the world. It sounded perfect. It was a place where no one would know her, where the ghosts of a San Antonio bank could not follow. It was a flight from a specific searing trauma, and the lost locket became a symbol of everything she had to reclaim her past, her identity, and her sense of a place in the world. The stagecoach ride to Broken Ridge was a descent into a harsher, more elemental world. The sun hammered the cracked earth, turning the horizon into a shimmering mirage. Dust, fine as flour, coated Eva's tongue and settled in the deep lines of her exhaustion. She stepped off the coach into the main street of a town that seemed to be holding its breath against the oppressive heat. Broken Ridge was little more than a handful of weathered buildings squatting under an endless Texas sky, a place where hope seemed as scarce as water. The general store clerk, a man whose suspicious eyes seemed to take in every frayed edge of Eva's story, gave her directions with a grudging reluctance. White Hawk Ranch, you say? That's Daniel Nightwind's place. You sure that's where you want to head, miss? His tone was a clear warning, a suggestion that the ghosts she was fleeing might be replaced by dangers of a different kind. Ava's resolve hardened. She had faced down armed men for the sake of a memory. She would not be deterred by the vague prejudices of a small town. I'm sure she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need the work. The hired wagon, driven by an elderly Mexican man named Carlos, whose kindness was a balm on her raw nerves, rattled along a rutted dirt road. The landscape grew wilder, the cultivated fields giving way to rolling hills covered in mesquite and sage. It was a country where a person could disappear. You are certain about this? Señorita Carlos asked, his concerned eyes meeting hers in the reflection of a small mirror. The Nightwind place. It is not like other ranches. People in town, they talk. They say things about the man who lives there, about his daughter. I'm sure Eva repeated, though a flutter of uncertainty stirred in her chest. He's offering a job. That's all that matters. Carlos pointed ahead to a plume of smoke rising from a chimney barely visible through a grove of cottonwood trees. There it is. White Hawk Ranch. I will wait, señorita, in case you decide staying is not for you. The ranch house materialized through the trees, larger and more solid than she had expected. Built of sturdy timber and native stone with a wide porch that wrapped around its front, it looked less like a temporary shelter and more like a fortress built to withstand the harshness of both the land and its people. From the eaves hung wind chimes made of polished bone and colored glass, their soft melodic clinking a strange and beautiful welcome. A man emerged from the barn as the wagon rolled to a stop. He moved with the fluid, silent grace of someone who belonged to this wild country. He was tall and lean with bronze skin that spoke of a mixed heritage and dark hair that caught glints of copper in the afternoon sun. But it was his eyes that held Ava's attention. They were dark brown, flecked with gold, and they seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. They were the eyes of a man who had been judged harshly and had learned to build his own defenses. He was Daniel Nightwind. "You'd be Miss Harper, I assume," he said. His voice was quiet, with a hint of an accent she couldn't place a melody that spoke of two worlds. "I'm Daniel Nightwind. Thank you for making the journey." His manners were impeccable, but Ava saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze flickered toward the house as if guarding against an unseen threat. "Mr. Nightwind," Eva replied, her voice professional, a shield she had learned to use. "I'm here to discuss the position." "Of course," he said. "Perhaps we should go inside." He gave Carlos a polite but firm dismissal, and Eva understood that whatever was to be discussed, it would be done without witnesses. The interior of the house was a surprising mix of rugged practicality and quiet warmth. Polished wooden floors were covered with colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves lining one wall held everything from ranching manuals to works of philosophy. But what caught Ava's eye were the signs of a child's life: a small pair of intricately beaded moccasins by the door, a hand-carved wooden doll sitting on a shelf, a brightly colored blanket draped over the sofa. "Miss Harper," Daniel began, his expression guarded. "Before we talk terms, I need to be direct. This is more than a cooking job. My daughter, she's 7. The last woman who helped us left suddenly. Little Moon has questions I don't know how to answer." The pain beneath his controlled words was palpable. "What kind of questions?" Ava asked, her voice softening. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of deep weariness. "She wants to know why women keep leaving. Why she can't have a mother like the children in town. Her own mother died when she was 3. The honesty was disarming, cutting through Eva's practiced defenses. "And you're worried I'll give her false hope," Eva stated, understanding dawning. "That she'll form an attachment only to have it broken." A flicker of relief crossed his face. "Exactly. Little Moon is perceptive. I need someone who can be kind to her, but who understands that this is a job, not the start of a fairy tale." Before he could continue, a small figure appeared in the doorway, moving with a silent grace that mirrored her father's. She had his bronze skin and dark, intelligent eyes, but her features held the promise of a different, striking beauty. She wore a simple dress, but her feet were bare, and her dark hair was braided with colored ribbons. This was Little Moon. The child walked directly to Eva, her gaze direct and assessing. "Are you going to be our new cook?" she asked, her voice clear and surprisingly confident. Eva found herself smiling. "I hope so. My name is Evangeline, but you can call me Eva." "My Comanche name is Little Moon," the girl said, her delivery matter of fact. "It was my mother's choice for me." Daniel watched them, and Eva knew this was the real interview. He might be hiring a cook, but his daughter was choosing a companion. Little Moon reached out, and to Eva's surprise took her hands, her small fingers tracing the calluses and faint scars. "Good Little Moon," pronounced finally. "You have working hands, not lady hands." The last woman had lady hands. She was afraid of everything. Then a more pressing question: "Can you make good bread, the soft kind with a crunchy outside?" Ava laughed, a genuine rusty sound she hadn't made in weeks. "I can make bread that will make your mouth water," she promised. "And I can teach you how, if you'd like. A girl should know how to take care of herself." The child's eyes lit up. "Really teach me, not just let me watch." The hunger in her voice was for more than knowledge. It was for connection, for someone to invest in her. Something shifted in the room. Little Moon moved closer, her dark eyes searching Eva's face as if looking for a hidden truth. Then her voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with a child's hope and a history of disappointment. "Are you going to stay this time?" she asked. The other ladies said they would. But then they left. A fierce protective instinct flared in Eva's chest, an emotion she hadn't felt in years. She took the girl's small hand in both of hers. "I can't promise forever, little moon. Life changes. But I can promise you this, if I take this job I won't leave because of gossip or because things get difficult." Little Moon squeezed her hand. Mama used to say the best families were the ones people chose for themselves. She looked up at Eva, her gaze devastatingly direct. "I prayed for someone who would want to be my mother, not just someone Papa pays." The words struck Eva like a physical blow, articulating a longing she hadn't dared admit to herself. She glanced at Daniel and saw a storm of emotions in his eyes, fear, hope, and a startling recognition. This was it. This was the moment of decision. "Little Moon," Eva said, her voice thick with emotion. "Becoming a mother isn't something you decide in an afternoon. But I promise I will care for you. Not because it's my job, but because you are a special girl who deserves to be cared for." She looked around the warm, lived-in room, at the quiet, resilient man trying to hold his world together, and at the bright, brave child who had seen straight into her soul. For the first time since the cold metallic click of the locket dropping into a thief's bag, she felt a sense of purpose. She felt like she was home. "I accept the position," she said simply. Little Moon's face broke into a radiant smile, and Daniel Nightwind let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the moment she arrived. He looked at Eva, and for the first time, the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. He had offered her a job. But standing on the porch of White Hawk Ranch, Eva knew she had accepted something far more significant. She had chosen the unknown dangers of the frontier over the ghosts of her past, and in doing so had taken the first step toward building a new life from the ashes of the old. The first few weeks at White Hawk Ranch settled into a rhythm as steady and comforting as a heartbeat. Life was governed by the sun and the seasons, a world away from the frantic, fearful energy of the city. Eva discovered a deep satisfaction in the simple, honest labor of running a household, in the smell of baking bread, mingling with the scent of sage on the wind, in the sight of clean laundry snapping on the line against a brilliant blue sky, and in the sound of Little Moon's laughter echoing through the house. Her bond with the child deepened with each passing day. Little Moon was a constant, curious presence at her side, her small hands eagerly helping to knead dough or shell peas. She asked endless questions, not with the aimless chatter of most children, but with a focused intelligence that sought to understand the world. "Why are your hands rough, Eva?" she asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch steps. Eva looked down at her own calloused palms. "Because they've done a lot of work, sweetheart. They've scrubbed floors and cooked meals and learned how to be strong." "Like Papa's hands," Little Moon observed, nodding sagely. "He says hands tell the story of a life." Ava's relationship with Daniel evolved more slowly, a quiet, cautious dance of two people who had learned to be wary of trust. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He noticed the way she organized the pantry for efficiency, the care she took in mending Little Moon's clothes, the pots of hardy wildflowers she planted by the porch. He would leave a freshly picked apple on the kitchen counter for her in the mornings, or ensure the woodbox was always full without being asked. They were small gestures, quiet acknowledgments of a growing partnership built on mutual respect. One evening after Little Moon was asleep, they sat on the porch, the silence between them comfortable. The sky was a vast sweep of indigo velvet, littered with stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "You've made a difference here, Eva." Daniel said, his voice low. The house, it feels like a home again. Little Moon hasn't been this happy since before her mother. He trailed off the name, still a difficult word to speak. The peace, however, was a fragile thing. One sweltering afternoon, while Daniel was out mending a fence line on the far side of the property, 3 riders approached the ranch. Eva recognized the swagger of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. The leader was Clayton Morris, a local land baron with a reputation for sharp dealing and a Rottweiler's tenacity. He was a heavy-set man whose small, mean eyes seemed to miss nothing. Eva felt a familiar prickle of fear, a cold echo of the bank robbery. She sent Little Moon inside with a quiet instruction to stay out of sight, then smoothed her apron and stepped onto the porch to meet them, her posture deliberately calm and unwavering. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, her tone polite but firm. "Mr. Nightwind is out on the range. Can I help you?" Morris's gaze swept over her, a dismissive, appraising look that made her skin crawl. "So you're the new one," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "They don't usually last this long. We've come to have a word with Nightwind. A business proposition." "Then you'll have to come back when he's here," Eva replied, refusing to be intimidated. Morris dismounted, stepping onto the porch, violating the unspoken boundary of the home. "See, that's the thing. We think maybe you could help him see reason. This ranch, it's a lot for one man to handle, especially a man like him. It'd be a shame if something were to happen. To the cattle, or to his little girl." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, ignited a cold fire in Eva's belly. She stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Morris and the door to the house where Little Moon was hiding. "I think you should leave," she said, her voice low and steady, imbued with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "You are not welcome here. And if you ever threaten that child again, you will discover that Daniel Nightwind is not the only person on this ranch you need to worry about." For a long moment, Morris stared at her, surprised by her defiance. His men shifted uneasily in their saddles. He had expected a frightened servant, not a fierce guardian. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust inches from her feet. "Your choice, lady," he sneered, turning to remount. "Tell Nightwind we'll be back." As they rode away, Ava's knees felt weak, but her resolve was like tempered steel. When Daniel returned at dusk, she told him everything, her voice clear and factual, leaving out her own fear. He listened without interruption, his face growing hard, his eyes turning to flint. When she finished, he reached out, and his hand gently touched her arm. "Thank you, Ava," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. "You stood your ground. You protected my daughter." In that moment, the line between employer and employee blurred into something deeper, something closer to an alliance. The threats escalated. A section of fence was cut, allowing a dozen head of cattle to wander off. Official-looking notices began to arrive, filled with dense legal language questioning his water rights and property lines. The pressure was constant, a slow, suffocating siege. One night, as they reviewed another fraudulent legal document by lamplight, Daniel finally spoke of the past he had kept so carefully guarded. "My wife, Sarah, her family never approved of me." He began, his gaze fixed on the flickering flame. "They were wealthy from San Antonio. They saw our marriage as a betrayal of her class, her race. They disowned her when she chose to build a life with me out here." "That must have been terribly painful for her," Eva said softly. "It was," Daniel admitted. "But Sarah was strong. She believed in the life we were making. She said this ranch wasn't just land. It was a statement that love didn't recognize the boundaries that other people drew. Her family, they never understood. Her older brother William was the worst. He saw me as a savage who had stolen his sister and lured her away to a primitive life. The name William sent a sliver of ice through Eva's veins. It was a common name, she told herself. A coincidence. But the description of a wealthy, ruthless man from San Antonio. The image of cold, calculating eyes rose unbidden from the dark corners of her memory. She pushed the thought away, dismissing it as a phantom of her past trauma. The campaign of harassment culminated a week later with the arrival of a sleek, black carriage that looked profoundly out of place against the rugged backdrop of the ranch. A man stepped out tall and impeccably dressed in a dark city suit. He moved with an air of absolute authority, his polished boots leaving precise prints in the dust. As he approached the porch, the afternoon sun glinted off his face, and Eva's blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the air growing thin and hard to breathe. It was him. It was the man from the bank. It was the man with the winter sky eyes who had stolen her locket and her peace of mind. It was William Garrett. He stopped at the foot of the steps, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with an expression of profound distaste before settling on Daniel. He ignored Eva completely, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Daniel Garrett said, his voice slick and devoid of warmth. "It has been a long time." Daniel's body went rigid, his hand instinctively moving to rest near the pistol at his hip. "Garrett, what are you doing here? Your man Morris has already delivered your threats." Garrett smiled, that same cold, terrifying smile Eva remembered from the bank. "Mr. Morris is a businessman. I, on the other hand, am family." He let the word hang in the air, a poisoned dart. "I believe you have something that belongs to me, to my bloodline." His gaze shifted, moving past Daniel and Eva to the doorway, where little Moon had appeared, drawn by the strange voices. The child stood there, a small, brave figure, her eyes wide with curiosity. Garrett's smile widened, becoming something predatory and possessive. "Hello, niece," he said, his voice dropping to a proprietary caress. "I am your Uncle William, and I've come to take you home." The world shrank to the space on the porch, the air crackling with the sudden, terrible revelation. This was not about land or cattle or water rights. This was not a business dispute. This was a war. And William Garrett, Sarah's brother, had just declared his intention to claim not only the ranch he believed was his family's rightful legacy, but the child he saw as the last remnant of his sister's squandered bloodline. Eva looked from Garrett's cold, possessive face to Daniel's stunned grief and understood that the fight for White Hawk Ranch had just become a fight for their very existence. The air on the porch grew thick and heavy, charged with the weight of Garrett's revelation. Daniel stood as if carved from stone, the shock of seeing his long-despised brother-in-law warring with the immediate instinctual need to protect his child. Little Moon sensing the shift from a mere confrontation to something far more dangerous, moved to stand behind her father's legs, her small hands clutching the rough denim of his trousers. "You have no right to be here," William Daniel said, his voice a low growl, each word laced with years of animosity. "Sarah made her choice. This is our home. Little Moon is my daughter." Garrett let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Sarah made a mistake. A foolish, romantic mistake that cost her everything. And this place," he said, waving a dismissive hand at the solid, well-kept ranch house, "is not a home. It is a hovel on the edge of a savage wasteland. My sister deserved better, and her daughter certainly does." He took a step toward the porch, his eyes cold as chips of ice fixed on Little Moon. "She has my family's blood in her veins. She will not be raised by a half-breed in the dirt, cut off from her rightful heritage. I am here to rescue her from this squalor." The insult delivered with such casual cruelty broke through Daniel's shock. He moved with a speed that was startling, placing himself fully between Garrett and his daughter. "You will not come near her," he warned, his hand now resting firmly on the butt of his pistol. "You abandoned Sarah. Your family turned their backs on her. You have no claim on her child." Ava watched her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw the flicker of something in Garrett's eyes as he looked at her, a faint, dismissive recognition. He remembered her from the bank. She was the insignificant woman whose despair he had found illuminating. The realization was chilling. His presence here was not a coincidence. It was a convergence of all the darkness she had tried to escape. "And you are?" Garrett asked, his tone dripping with disdain as he finally acknowledged her. "The latest in a line of hired help. I presume I do hope for your sake that you understand the futility of your employer's position. This is a family matter." "I am part of this family," Eva said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. She moved to stand beside Daniel, a silent declaration of solidarity. Garrett's gaze swept over them, a tableau of defiance he clearly found pathetic. How touching. A ready-made family. But sentiment doesn't alter legal reality. My sister's share of our family's estate was never properly settled. I contend that this property, purchased with what should have been her inheritance, belongs to the Garrett family, and as her only living blood relative of suitable standing, guardianship of my niece naturally falls to me. It was a monstrous, twisted logic, but Ava could see the cold calculation behind it. He intended to use his wealth and influence to paint Daniel as an unfit parent and tear their family apart through the courts. "You will not succeed," Daniel said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Oh, I will," Garrett replied with chilling certainty. "I have resources you cannot even imagine. You see, Daniel, you thought you could take my sister and hide her away from civilization. But civilization always finds a way to reclaim its own. Consider this your formal notice. I will see you in court." With a final contemptuous look, he turned and walked back to his carriage, leaving a toxic silence in his wake. The dust settled, but the poison of his words lingered in the air. In the weeks that followed, Garrett made good on his threat. The harassment escalated from petty intimidation to a full-scale legal assault. A corrupt injunction signed by a judge from a distant district known to be in Garrett's pocket was delivered by a federal marshal. The document was a masterpiece of legal malice designed to cripple them. All ranch operations were to cease immediately. No cattle could be sold, no fences repaired, no new crops planted. They were legally trapped on their own land, and their livelihood strangled by paperwork perfectly set up for Garrett's final killing blow. Their isolation was absolute. Supplies in town, once offered on credit, now required cash they no longer had. Neighbors who had been friendly became distant, fearful of being drawn into the conflict with a man as powerful as William Garrett. The ranch, once a place of vibrant life, became a silent prison. Ava watched the toll it took on Daniel. He grew leaner, quieter, the lines of worry deepening around his eyes. He spent his days staring out at the cattle he couldn't sell and the fields he couldn't work, a storm of frustration and helplessness brewing inside him. But it was the fear for Little Moon that tormented him most. "He wants to take her, Eva," he confessed one night, his voice raw with a pain that tore at her heart. "He'll tell the court I'm poor, that my heritage makes me an unfit parent. He'll use his money to buy witnesses and twist the truth until no one remembers what it looks like." Ava took his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We won't let that happen, Daniel. He underestimates us. He sees a half Comanche rancher and a hired cook. He doesn't see a family. He doesn't understand what we'll do to protect each other." Her strength became his anchor. She stretched their dwindling food supplies with a creativity born of necessity. turning their garden vegetables and stored flour into meals that felt like feasts. She filled their days with routine and purpose, ensuring Little Moon's lessons continued, her songs were sung, and her laughter was not silenced by the suffocating weight of adult fears. During this time, Ava began to piece together more of Sarah's story. In a small leather-bound trunk, she found Sarah's journals and a faded photograph. The woman in the picture had a gentle, determined face and eyes that shone with intelligence. Looking closer, Ava saw a subtle, undeniable family resemblance to William Garrett in the set of her jaw and the arch of her brow. It was a chilling confirmation of his claim. The journals told a story of a woman deeply in love, but also one haunted by the family she had left behind. She wrote of her brother William's cold fury, his accusations that she was disgracing their name. He cannot understand love. Sarah had written, "He only understands possession and control. I fear he will never forgive me or Daniel." The words were a ghostly warning from the past. The breaking point came with the first storm of the season. The sky turned a bruised, angry purple, and the wind began to howl, stripping leaves from the cottonwood trees. It was a violent, elemental fury that mirrored the turmoil in their lives, cutting them off from the rest of the world. As rain lashed against the windows and thunder cracked overhead, Ava saw them riders approaching through the downpour, dark figures moving with grim purpose. It was Garrett and a half-dozen of his hired men. "Daniel," Ava cried, her voice sharp with alarm. "They're here." Daniel was already moving, pulling a heavy rifle from its rack above the mantel. "Eva, take Little Moon to the root cellar. Bar the door from the inside." "No," Eva said, her resolve absolute. She grabbed an old heavy shotgun from the corner. "We face this together." Little Moon, her face pale but her eyes steady, ran to Eva's side. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, repeating the words that had become their family's creed. The men dismounted, their slickers dark and gleaming in the torrential rain. They didn't bother knocking. Garrett kicked the door in the wood, splintering with a sickening crack. He stood on the threshold, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his face a mask of triumphant hatred. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in a stark, ghostly white Garrett, and his men framed in the doorway, Daniel and Eva inside, weapons raised with Little Moon sheltered between them. "This is the end of the line," Daniel Garrett said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "The pretense is over. You will sign over the deed to the ranch and grant me full guardianship of my niece, or my men will remove you. Permanently." "You'll take this land over my dead body," Daniel snarled. "An arrangement that is perfectly acceptable to me." Garrett replied, a cold smile touching his lips. He took a step inside his men, fanning out behind him, their pistols drawn. The standoff was absolute, a frozen moment of lethal tension in the flickering lamplight of the ranch house. The storm raged outside, a wild symphony of wind and thunder, but inside the only sound was the ragged breathing of people on the precipice of violence. Garrett's eyes locked on Daniel's, and in their cold depths, Eva saw a hatred so profound, so personal, that it went far beyond any dispute over land or legacy. This was about something else entirely. It was about annihilation. The ranch house felt like a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Lamplight threw long dancing shadows that twisted men into monstrous shapes. The storm hammered at the walls, each clap of thunder a percussive beat counting down to violence. Garrett stood in the center of the room, a picture of calm malice, while his men took up positions, their pistols held with a steady, practiced ease. "This is your final chance." Daniel Garrett said, his voice deceptively reasonable. "Sign the papers. Give me the girl. Walk away with your life. A generous offer under the circumstances. The only thing you'll get from me is a bullet Daniel retorted, his rifle held tight against his shoulder, his aim unwavering. Garrett's gaze shifted to Eva, who stood beside Daniel, the heavy shotgun in her hands. "And you, the loyal housekeeper. Are you truly willing to die for him, for a life of provincial squalor?" "I am willing to die for my family," Eva answered, her voice clear and strong, despite the tremor in her hands. A flicker of genuine frustration crossed Garrett's face. He could not comprehend their defiance. To him, they were obstacles, sentimental fools clinging to a worthless piece of land and a half-breed child. His condescending patience finally snapped. He nodded to one of his men, a silent, deadly command. The man raised his pistol, aiming at Daniel. But in that split second, Carlos, the old ranch hand, burst through the back door from the kitchen, a rusty but formidable-looking axe held high. He had slipped out of the barn and circled the house, a desperate, valiant last stand. His sudden appearance created a moment of chaos, a crucial diversion. Daniel fired. His shot was not aimed at Garrett, but at the lamp hanging from the ceiling. The room plunged into darkness, pierced only by the brilliant, disorienting flashes of lightning from the storm outside. Gunshots exploded in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. Muzzle flashes lit up scenes of frantic, desperate battle. Eva pulled little Moon down behind a heavy overturned table, shielding the child with her own body. She could hear Daniel moving, firing, using his intimate knowledge of the house to his advantage. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the splintering of wood as bullets tore through the walls. A flash of lightning revealed a man lunging toward them. Eva raised the shotgun and fired. The recoil slammed her back against the wall, but the man crumpled to the floor with a cry of pain. Fear and adrenaline coursed through her, a terrifying, clarifying rush. The battle was short and brutal. When a long, rumbling peal of thunder faded, an eerie silence fell over the room. Another flash of lightning showed the outcome. 2 of Garrett's men were down, and the others, including Morris, were holding back, their confidence shattered by the ferocity of the defense. Daniel stood over a third man, his pistol steady. Garrett alone seemed unfazed. He stood near the fireplace, a small derringer having appeared in his hand as if by magic. His expensive suit was unruffled, his expression one of cold, calculating fury. He had underestimated them. Impressive. He conceded, his voice dangerously soft, but ultimately pointless. He turned his attention to Eva, who was still shielding little Moon. "It seems I must provide you with a more compelling reason to see things my way." He moved with astonishing speed, crossing the room and seizing little Moon, pulling her away from Eva's protective grasp. He held the small, struggling girl in front of him as a shield, pressing the cold barrel of the derringer to her temple. No, Eva screamed a raw, primal sound of pure terror. Daniel froze his face, a mask of agony. "Let her go, William. This is between us." "It has always been about her." Garrett hissed, his face twisted with a mad, triumphant glee. He looked at Daniel, his eyes burning with a hatred that was almost incandescent. "You want to know why I've done all this? Why I've spent a fortune to ruin you?" It was never about the land. It was about justice for Sarah. "You call this justice?" Daniel choked out, his rifle lowering slightly. "Sarah died in this house." Garrett whispered, his voice trembling with a terrible, hidden grief. "She died of pneumonia, you said. A common frontier illness. That's the story you tell yourself, isn't it?" Lightning flashed again, illuminating the terrible truth on his face. The Dr. Garrett continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "You sent for him from town, but he was delayed. A washed-out bridge, he told you. An unfortunate act of nature." He paused, savoring the moment, the final devastating revelation. "There was no washed-out bridge, Daniel. I was in town that week, I paid the doctor a substantial sum of money to lose his way, to take the long road, to arrive just a few hours too late. The confession hung in the air, more shocking than any gunshot. He hadn't just hated Daniel. He had orchestrated his own sister's death to punish the man she loved. His goal was not to reclaim a legacy. It was to utterly destroy Daniel, to take the one thing he had left of Sarah, their child, after ensuring Sarah herself was gone forever. A sound of pure, inhuman rage tore from Daniel's throat. The grief and fury he had suppressed for years erupted in a single volcanic wave. He lunged forward, his rifle discarded his hands, outstretched, his only thought to kill the monster who had murdered his wife. He tackled Garrett, sending them both crashing to the floor. The Derringer flew from Garrett's hand, skittering into a dark corner. Little Moon scrambled free, running into Eva's arms, sobbing with terror. Daniel's hands closed around Garrett's throat, his face a mask of vengeance. "You killed her," he roared over the sound of the storm. "You let her die." Garrett clawed at Daniel's hands, his face turning purple, a gurgling sound escaping his lips. Daniel stopped. Eva screamed, her heart breaking. She saw the abyss of vengeance opening up before him, an act that would save his daughter, but cost him his soul. Don't become him. For her, for us, we need justice, not revenge. Her words, a desperate plea for the man she loved, seemed to cut through his murderous rage. His grip loosened his shoulders, slumping as a great, shuddering sob of grief and loss racked his body. He had come to the very edge of the precipice, and with Ava's help had pulled himself back. It was in that moment of fragile, hard-won humanity that the splintered front door was thrown open again. A man stood framed in the doorway, rain streaming from his oilskin coat, a shotgun held at the ready. It was the local sheriff, followed by a posse of armed townsmen. Carlos, his arm bleeding but his face resolute, stood behind them. He had made it to town. He had brought back the law. The sheriff took in the scene, the darkened room and the bodies on the floor, Daniel kneeling over the gasping form of William Garrett. "Nightwind," he said, his voice grim. "Looks like we got here just in time." Justice had arrived not by a distant telegram, but in the form of neighbors who had finally chosen a side. As the sheriff's men took a bruised and defeated Garrett into custody, Daniel rose and went to Eva and Little Moon, gathering them both into his arms, holding them as if he would never let them go. The storm outside began to subside, its fury spent, leaving behind the clean, quiet sound of the rain. Inside the ravaged ranch house, a family tested by fire and hatred had survived. In the days following the storm, the full extent of William Garrett's corrupt empire unraveled. His confession, made under the weight of his capture, and the testimony of his own hired men exposed the bribery, the fraudulent legal claims, and the vast conspiracy to dispossess families across the territory. The arrest of Judge Carlisle sent shockwaves through the capital, and the injunction against the Nightwind Ranch was summarily nullified. The community of Broken Ridge, shamed by their long-standing prejudice and awakened by the stark reality of the violence at White Hawk Ranch, rallied around the family they had once shunned. Neighbors arrived with hammers and lumber to help repair the bullet-scarred house. The banker's wife organized a town-wide collection, bringing baskets of food and offering a formal apology to Eva for her past coldness. They were no longer the outsiders. They were heroes, symbols of resilience against a powerful evil. Daniel and Eva were married a few weeks later, not in a large public ceremony, but in a simple, heartfelt one on the front porch of their rebuilt home. Judge Morrison officiated, his voice filled with genuine warmth. Little Moon stood between them, holding both their hands, her face a portrait of pure, unadulterated joy. The guests were the people who had stood by them, Carlos the sheriff, and a handful of neighboring ranchers who had learned that the measure of a man had nothing to do with his heritage and everything to do with his character. The ranch began to thrive. With the legal threats gone and the community support secured, Daniel's hard work finally began to pay off. The cattle herds grew, the fields yielded a bountiful harvest, and the sound of laughter, once again, became the prevailing music of the house. Several months later, a small official-looking package arrived from the U.S. Marshal's office in San Antonio. It contained the personal effects recovered from William Garrett's possessions. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton, was a small silver locket. Ava's hands trembled as she picked it up. It felt heavier than she remembered, weighted with the memory of loss and the miracle of its return. She clicked open the delicate clasp. The tiny, solemn faces of her parents stared back at her. Their images, a steadfast link to a past she had thought was severed forever. Daniel came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Your anchor," he said softly, understanding the significance of the moment. For a long time, Ava simply held it, this relic of her old life, a symbol of the lonely, drifting woman she had once been. Then she walked over to the stone fireplace, its mantel now the heart of their home. On one side stood the small framed photograph of Sarah, her gentle, determined face, a constant, loving presence in their lives. Ava did not put the locket away in a drawer to be forgotten. With a sense of quiet ceremony, she opened it and stood it on the mantelpiece right next to Sarah's picture. The two images, the parents she had never known and the mother her daughter had lost, stood together. It was a powerful, wordless act. It was not about replacing the past, but about honoring it, about weaving all the disparate threads of their lives, the grief, the loss, the love, the survival, into a new, stronger whole. It was a testament that this family was not built on the erasure of what came before, but on the brave and loving inclusion of it. Little Moon, who had been watching from the doorway, ran to her. She didn't say anything about the locket or the picture. She simply wrapped her small arms around Ava's waist, pressing her face into her side. She looked up, her dark eyes shining with a love that was absolute and unconditional. "Mama," she whispered the word, a perfect final piece falling into place. Ava knelt and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, her heart so full it felt it might burst. She looked over the child's head at Daniel, whose own eyes were shining with tears. They were whole. They were home. The ghosts had been vanquished not by running, but by standing their ground and building a future so bright it cast no shadows.